I'm Mary Trosco, CLEA's Executive Director, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to one of the 2022 Law Day events presented by the Manitoba Bar Association and Community Legal Education Association, or CLEA. First of all, we'd like to acknowledge that CLEA's office and the Manitoba Bar Association's office are located on Treaty 1 territory, the traditional gathering place of the Anishinaabe Cree, Oji Cree, Dakota, and Dene people, and traditional homeland of the Métis people. Winnipeg's water is sourced from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation. We acknowledge that much harm was done in the past and dedicate ourselves to move forward in the spirit of reconciliation. Now, a little bit of background about Law Day I thought would be in order. So in 1983, the Canadian Bar Association introduced Law Day as a way to commemorate the signing of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. The Manitoba Bar Association is a branch of the Canadian Bar Association that advocates for the legal profession. Community Legal Education Association, or CLEA, is a charitable organization that provides a variety of legal information education programs to Manitobans, including a phone-in legal information program. We arrange speakers for schools and community groups. We produce plain language legal publications, arrange webinars on a variety of topics, and have a website with a wealth of information. We believe that unknown rights are not rights at all. Because of the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, there could not be an open house at Winnipeg Law Courts building as there has been in past years. So instead, we're presenting a series of webinars on a variety of legal topics. Today's webinar on law as a career is the last in the series. We have three presenters with us today, Victoria Weir, Brendan Yerish, and Nina Holatova. Victoria graduated with her JD from Robson Hall in 2018, where she focused on courses relating to criminal law, family law, and legal ethics. Victoria articled with a boutique criminal defense firm before transitioning to civil litigation and human rights work after a call to the bar in 2019. Victoria now works as a program coordinator at Community Legal Education Association. She works primarily in the Workplace Sexual Harassment Project, developing and delivering workshops about employment law and harassment in the workplace. Victoria is passionate about trauma-informed legal practice and has been invited to deliver lectures on the topic for students at Robson Hall. Brendan Yerish. Brendan was called from Manitoba Bar in 2019. He completed his articles at Brodsky & Company, where he mainly practiced criminal defense. He's worked as a legal writer at CLEA since 2019. Nina Holatova. Nina graduated from law school in 2019 and completed her articling term at Legal Aid Dauphin in Dauphin, Manitoba, focusing primarily on the area of family law. Following her call to the bar, Nina joined a private firm where she continued to represent clients in a range of family law matters, as well as in estates, real estate, and civil litigation. Today, Nina is a lawyer and project coordinator at Community Legal Education Association. She delivers webinars across the province on family law and elder abuse. So in terms of process, we'll hear from Victoria first. After her presentation, we'll pause for questions. Please use the Q&A function. Then we'll hear from Brendan, and after his presentation, we'll again pause for questions. Then we'll hear from Nina. So I'll start with Victoria. Please take it away.
Thank you so much. So I'm happy to be talking today about law as a career. And I think that maybe the best way for me to do that is to share how I ended up on the path that I'm on now, and kind of the lessons that I've learned through that process. And I can start by laying out some of the themes, I guess, in that story that I'll tell you about my journey. And maybe my path could be described as a little bit non-traditional in terms of my background and what I'm doing now. And that's okay. It's good. No matter what you choose to do or how you get there, a fulfilling legal career is definitely possible. Nothing rules it out, and it can be easy to encounter an obstacle or circumstances and think that that's the end of the road. But I and many other lawyers can prove that's not the case. And related to that, I think that my path to where I am now is not exactly linear. So I didn't set out with the intention of going to law school. I didn't plan according to that. But in the end, it made absolutely no difference. I've ended up in a place that suits me and my strengths and my interests and my goals. I apologize. My dog here has woken up in the snowstorm. If I can just have one moment. So to begin with, I never actually wanted to be a lawyer. I had lots of dream careers over my life. I wanted to be an archaeologist or a social worker, certainly never a lawyer, which is interesting because I think that if I'd known more about what a legal career could look like, that might have been different. I had neighbors and friends and family members in the legal profession, but my impression of what legal practice was like was that it wasn't going to be a good fit for me, that it was lots of time in an office, things like that. And that just wasn't really the way that I wanted to interact with the community. I did try really hard in school. I was really keen. And when it came time to apply for university, I knew that I wanted to either go into social work or education. I chose neither. I ended up in business school, actually, which is funny in hindsight, given my interests, but I thought that it would be a more stable path for me. And that path ended up being really stressful because I had picked something that wasn't really right for me. And I was trying to rush through it as soon as possible. And I ended up getting diagnosed with cancer. Which really made me take a pause and take a little break from everything that I was doing. And it made me realize that I really had to do what I wanted to do with my own life. So that's kind of cliche, but it made it clear that life is too short to do something that doesn't interest you. I ended up taking time off of school and coming back and trying out some different programs and courses that I thought would better align with my interests. But after I recovered, I also started working at a job that I loved. I spent a summer at a community organization doing youth programming. I ended up staying for 2 years. And that job and that organization were the love of my life. And I know that's funny to say that about a job, but it's so true. And I learned so much about grassroots community care, about restorative justice, about all these things that meant so much to me and that really allowed me to learn about my values and priorities. So while I was still figuring school out during this process, I kind of realized that I just needed to pick a different path that was going to align better with me. So I wish I had a better story of how I ended up in law school. I don't really. In that job, I was working with youth who were involved in a lot of systems, and those systems were causing a lot of harm to them in many cases. And as an outreach worker, I didn't really have the platform or the pull to advocate as effectively. So I felt that if I became a lawyer, maybe I could get that education and bring that back to the community and work with the folks that I was looking to work with and that I had been working with in that role. So one night I was looking up law school at the U of M and I saw that you could be admitted without an undergrad degree as long as you had 2 years finished, which I did. So at 2 a.m, I signed up for the summer sitting of the LSAT and I ordered a big stack of LSAT books and then I went to bed. And a few weeks later, a huge box of LSAT books showed up. And I realized that this is what I was doing. So that's how I ended up in law school. And law school was a really big shock for me. I was so used to working and feeling independent that it was a really big transition to being full-time in this intense academic setting. And I really questioned my decision to go back to school. And I'd also had to quit my job that I loved so much to go back there. So I had gone from this place that I really, really loved and felt really fulfilled to being in this completely new experience. And if I'm honest, I really did struggle a lot with my mental health in that first year. That was really difficult for me, but feeling, out of place and feeling like the grading was intense. But I discovered that I really loved criminal law. That course really resonated with me, partly because of my interest in the justice system and partly just because it seemed more practical in real life in a way that some of the other courses didn't to me. And I also volunteered a lot in first year, and that helped me feel more connected and grounded to the community and reminded me why I'd gone to law school in the first place. So after first year, I got a job at Legal Help Center, a student-run legal clinic that the U of M works with. They do amazing work in the drop-in and family law clinics. So in that clinic, people come in with all kinds of problems. Some are mostly legal, some have a social service kind of element to them. And it helps you develop skills in figuring out a client's needs, helping them to meet those needs, to connect them to resources that will support them, and to address kind of the whole problem, not just the legal side. And that really resonated with me. So I ended up staying there into my second summer and during the years too. And in second and third year, I also had a chance to take classes that really interested me and made me excited about law and bioethics, about criminal law, about family law. And I got lots of experience with lots of court time, lots of practice speaking in public, making submissions, drafting court documents. So when I applied for articling, I knew that I probably wanted to stick with one of those areas. And I ended up choosing to article with a criminal defense firm that I really respected. So after graduation, that's where I ended up. And it was by far the most intense year of my life in every way possible. And I'm sure you'll hear this from everyone, but articling is a very, very intense experience, lots of learning. In Manitoba, we don't have the bar exam. We have a prep course. It was called CLEA when I did it, but with kind of assignments and assessments that are related to the practice of law and to your ability to kind of do the actual work of a lawyer. And that was really valuable, but it's also juggling that work with the work of articling as well. The lifestyle of criminal practice, especially during articling, is also really intense. It's not uncommon to work 6 days a week in many areas of law, but especially crim, and working those really long hours and being on call, which is so necessary for meeting clients' needs because needs don't stop at the end of a workday. But it was a great learning experience, and I learned so much about interviewing clients, about thinking on my feet, about making submissions, about negotiating, about problem solving. It was a crash course in all those things. But for me, it was really hard to be surrounded by pain and trauma on a constant basis. And I think that needs to be acknowledged, that I'd been in community settings and doing community work for years. I thought I was prepared for that reality. But the experiences that I had within that system were truly on another level. And I think that lawyer mental health is something that it's an area that's getting more focus, which is really wonderful to see, but it's a really real thing. And I think that having support systems in place, self-care practices, learning if you can about trauma-informed perspective is so important if you're thinking about going into law. Taking care of yourself is so important in every profession, but especially when you're helping people through the most difficult chapters of their lives, it's important to have that education for yourself and also, I think, for your clients. So now lots of work is being done on trauma-informed lawyering. There's a podcast that's online or on any podcast platform. There's regular trainings. There's resources that you can access. And if you're thinking of law as a career, I highly recommend those. But as a result of kind of this whole combination of factors, I realized that criminal law wasn't going to be sustainable for me at this point in my life. But then I wondered, what am I going to do? Because I felt like so much of my goals and my identity were tied up in that career path. As articling was wrapping up, I lined up a job with a civil litigation firm. And civil litigation is basically anybody suing or being sued for anything. It's a very broad topic. And that allowed me to kind of bring that experience in the courtroom to a different area of law. So the firm I worked with also does a lot of work on a contract with victim services, representing victims of sexual violence in certain kind of criminal proceedings, as well as human rights work. So that let me move into a different area and still build on my interests and skills that I had worked on in the past. And I didn't know that those possibilities were available or that was an option until I looked into it. So looking and kind of keeping an open mind was really helpful for that. And while I worked there, I got a chance to work on basically every legal topic, family law related disputes, will related disputes, corporate fraud, a whole variety. So it was a lot of really great experience. But my main focuses for my own practice were on human rights and victim rights advocacy. I also had an opportunity there to learn more about trauma-informed practice, like I mentioned, and to lead professional development with the firm. So that was really important for my own values too. All through that time, though, I really had this nagging feeling that I wanted to get back to community-based work. I was volunteering lots. I was taking cases that I cared about, but it still wasn't the same for me. I was also working a lot, and I was really looking for a little bit of a better work-life balance for me, but I wasn't sure if that was possible within a legal career. I had, more traditional kind of roles in my mind, and I just wasn't sure what options were available to me, until I saw a job posting for CLEA in 2020 in the fall. So they were hiring for the Workplace Sexual Harassment Project. And it felt like such a great fit for the kind of work that I had been doing and the education that I had, my legal areas of interest, and the kind of lifestyle that I wanted. And until that kind of opportunity became available, I wasn't aware that that kind of combination existed. So I was excited to be hired for the job, and I'm still doing it. Thank you. Since October 2020, I design and lead workshops for community organizations around Manitoba, mostly about workplace sexual harassment. Answer questions, do outreach. I think my favorite part of my job is building relationships with organizations around Manitoba and helping to expand CLEA's connections. And I feel really fulfilled in my job. I'm really happy now. And I feel like all of the things that I've experienced and all of the parts of my life have really come together to help me in the role I'm in now, which I never could have predicted before. So looking back, even though there were definitely some difficult points in my life and things that could have gone differently, it's a bit corny to say, but every experience that I've had has helped me to become who I am now and to be in the role that I'm in now. There really isn't a specific script or way to do things perfectly to have a career in law. Everyone's paths and choices are going to look different. So my advice, I guess, for anybody who is setting out on a career in law is to really do what's best for you, what's going to make you happy. There's no one set of courses or knowledge for starting out in law that's a prerequisite. You can have so much flexibility. People go in with all sorts of backgrounds, academically and professionally. People go in after 2 years of school like I did, or after 20 years of school, or 20 years in a career as a mature student. So if you're interested in something, you might as well pursue it. It'll make you more interested in what you're learning. You'll probably do better. You'll have more to talk about, and it'll inform what you end up doing. So yeah, everything will work out. And if you want a legal career, you can build one that works for you. So that's what I have to share today. Thank you so much for inviting me to present today.
Okay, thank you, Victoria. That was so passionate. And I didn't hear Victoria's presentation, so I have I did not coerce her into saying all those wonderful things about CLEA. Does anybody have any questions for Victoria? Okay, maybe I'll pose one. Hopefully, it won't throw you off. If you had one thing that you would like to have known before you got into law, what would that be?
I think maybe the options that were available for career options, I think that I had one kind of picture in mind of what a legal career would look like. And I kind of invested fully in that idea of being, a criminal lawyer. But I kind of was operating from a pretty limited knowledge of what the career options were. I didn't know that there were organizations like CLEA that would have combined my interests. I didn't even know about civil litigation, really, about the options that were available. I didn't know about in-house jobs. Like, I really had limited knowledge. And so I think that if I'd had more knowledge about that, I maybe would have put less pressure on myself to, pick a lane earlier in law school. I think I maybe would have explored more options. But I think it ultimately worked out. So, the field is developing so much too over time, and things are always changing. So maybe that's what I would have liked to know, I guess, in advance. And I guess maybe too how supportive the profession has generally been. I think that I was nervous to approach people for information or for advice, but my experience has been that people are so willing to share their experiences and to share their advice and information. And I think I maybe would have asked more questions if I had known how supportive people would be.
Great answer. Perfect. Sorry to put you on the spot, but I thought I'd ask something. Anybody have any questions for Victoria? Because otherwise we'll move on to Brendan, and you can always ask Victoria questions afterwards. So we'll let Brendan take over at this point.
Sure. Hello, everyone. So I'll give a little bit of my background as well. I went to university as doing a humanities degree. I did a master's degree after that. And all along, I'd kind of thought that I would probably end up just sort of in a university setting forever. Like, I'd probably just go on, do a PhD at some point and maybe be a professor of something or other. After doing school for kind of like 6 or 7 years straight, I was like, okay, I at least need a break from this before I go back into it. So I I took kind of an administrative office job, and I worked there for a couple of years, and it was a very like easy, okay job that I just started to get bored with at some point. So I didn't really have any particular options in mind. I guess I got the idea to go to law school just I honestly can't even remember where I came from. It was never something that was on my radar. I'm not from a family of lawyers or anything. I don't think I even knew any lawyers before this, but I just kind of impulsively thought, well, like maybe I'll take the LSAT and see how it goes. And I did well on it. So I thought, okay, well, I guess maybe I should do this. I definitely didn't have any kind of plan in mind. So I applied to law school and got in. I was, I think, 26 when I started law school, which felt kind of older than a lot of people I was in law school with. But I think that's actually not too far off from what the average age is. I think it's like 25 or something like that. But I definitely felt a little bit over the hill starting out at 26 years old. But that's definitely not the case. There were a lot of people in my classes that were plenty older than me as well, and they have all had great success. So I knew going into law school, I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I knew I absolutely didn't want to do criminal law or family law. And then I took my intro to criminal law class and I loved it. It was my favorite class immediately. So I thought, okay, well, maybe I have to reevaluate this a little bit. It remained one of my favorite classes throughout the whole time I was in law school, and other criminal law classes I took as well. I always found that the most interesting and sort of easy to understand area of the law compared to like corporate law and stuff like that, which, even though I took those classes, I don't know that any of it really stuck with me at all. In law school, I didn't do as much volunteering as some people did, but I did volunteer at CLEA through the Pro Bono Students Canada program. I think it was in my last year of law school. And that was a great experience, getting to actually sort of deal with the people side of things, where I was talking to people on the phone and getting information about their legal issues they were having. And just kind of getting that side of it, because in school you're learning about the law kind of in the abstract, but you're not really getting a sense of the actual impacts it has on people and dealing with people. And so I think things like volunteering give you a much better sense of that than law school in itself does. I had a somewhat hard time finding articles. There's kind of a big push in law school in your second year, I guess. In the spring, they do a huge round of interviews with all the big firms, and so like probably about half your class has something lined up for articling by then. I did not. I was an okay law student, but I wasn't like a great law student by any stretch of the imagination. Definitely some classes I was not very good in at all. Again, the kind of corporate stuff that I didn't find as interesting. But I did find articles eventually. There was a period, sort of the start of my third year, where I didn't have anything lined up, and that was very stressful because you're almost done school and you need to article to become a practicing lawyer, and I didn't know what I was going to do. I did eventually find a position at a criminal defense firm. So my day-to-day articling experience was somewhat similar to, I think, other criminal defense articling students, where I was handling all the remands, like showing up in court to set new court dates for matters. I was handling bails and sometimes dispositions, so trying to get people who had recently been arrested out of jail until their court date, or dealing with their matters if they wanted to plead guilty, and sorting out sentencing and stuff like that, which I think is common to what a lot of other students were doing, as well as being on call. I had it a little easier than Victoria because there was another student at my firm where we would alternate week by week. So I was kind of only on call half the time, whereas Victoria, I think, was all the time. It's a lot rougher in experience. So yeah, again, meeting with clients who are in custody or not in custody sometimes to discuss their charges, and then as part of a bail plan, there was a lot of follow-up involved with like relatives to see if they actually could live with them, like the client had said they could, or if that was just something they were saying because they want to get out of jail. Following up with treatment programs that they had said they applied for to see if they could stay there as part of a bail plan, that kind of thing. My experience articling was a little different though than a lot of other students, because I was just working for one lawyer for the most part, whereas a lot of other articling students, they're there for the firm. So it's kind of like you're the student, you do the bails for the whole firm, whereas I was kind of doing a bunch of other stuff, but just for one lawyer. So if he had cases that were going to trial, I did a lot of that research, which in fairness, other students do too, but sometimes there were very short time constraints also, where I would just get sort of a weird random topic and he'd say, I need to call this guy back in 20 minutes, find everything you can about this topic in the next half an hour or something like that. I got to do a lot of trial prep as well, and even sit in on some of the trials he was doing with him and kind of assist him, which was a really cool experience that not everyone got, I would say. And I also did some weird kind of almost administrative stuff for him, like scheduling matters. He kind of gave me the run of his calendar and just kind of said, like, here's everything I have on. You can sort this out. You can see when I'm available, when I'm not available. So I was kind of almost like a legal assistant at the same time, which I think was a good experience, stressful in its own way, but yeah, I think it gave me a sense of really what it is to be a practicing lawyer. Like if I was to sort of start my own criminal defense practice, I think I would be much better prepared from that experience because I know, how to bill legal aid and how to schedule for myself. I also got to sit in on like case conferences, for example, which is where you go and actually sit in with a different judge who's not going to be overseeing the trial, but just kind of to make sure that the trial is on track and everything can proceed as expected. So that's another great experience as well. When my articling year was over, the firm didn't really have space for me, is all it was. I think they would have kept me on, but they just literally didn't have space for me there. And I kind of had grown to get used to the way things were at that particular firm. Like Victoria said, articling in criminal defense is really tough. It's a really stressful year. I think the first half of the year, I had a really tough time with it. And by the second half, once I sort of got the hang of things, I started to like it. So I think I would have stayed doing that kind of work, but I didn't really want to make the jump to a different firm, knowing sort of how everywhere else did things a little bit differently. And knowing that I'd be doing a lot more of the work I didn't particularly like if I was starting at a new place, as opposed to kind of continuing in the role I was in. So I was out of work actually for a while after I finished articling. I think it was probably 4 or 5 months where I couldn't find anything. And a position eventually opened up at CLEA as a legal writer. And I think partly because I had the connection there, that I had done some volunteering. I knew Mary, she knew who I was, so that probably didn't hurt. And I also have a background from, being in university before law school with a lot of writing and research and stuff like that. So this position was a pretty good fit for me, I think. And so my job now basically entails writing and updating publications for CLEA. That's, brochures, posters, website materials. I also do some videos for our website and stuff like that. And what I like about it is that it's on a variety of different topics because CLEA covers so much area. So one of the first things I had to do was there were changes to the Divorce Act, and I had to update all our family law materials. And again, it's, I said going into law school, I hate criminal law, I hate family law. And then I did criminal law, and my first job with CLEA was doing family law stuff. And, it was fun. So yeah, that's kind of my experience with the law. Again, a little atypical because I've never had this sort of big law firm experience where you're tracking your hours and things like that, which I think is a lot of people's impression of the law. It's definitely not the normal path, but I do think there are options out there for people who go through law school and have law degrees and maybe don't want to do that kind of thing. And yeah, I don't know what else to say. If anyone has any questions.
Any questions for Brendan? Okay, while we wait, I'll ask you the same question. Is there one thing you wish you had known before you went into law?
Well, I wish I had a better idea what I wanted to do before going into it, because there was also a lot of stress involved with sort of, being through a year and a half or 2 years of law school and still not really knowing what you want to make of it at the end of everything. So I definitely, well, I mean, if you're in it for the learning, I guess it's one thing, but I probably wouldn't recommend people go into law school not really knowing if they like law or what they want to do, just because it's a big commitment. It's a lot of money. It's pretty stressful. It's a lot of hard work. And at the end of the day, there are a lot of lawyers in the province. It can be hard to find a job, especially if you are looking for a particular area that a lot of other people want to do. So I think just do your research before you get into it is what I would say.
Fair enough. And I think you're right that people, I think they do tend to have an idea of what they want sometimes. And both you and Victoria have mentioned that sometimes what you think you might do ends up being something totally different afterwards. So I think being open to those kinds of suggestions, those kinds of opportunities is probably a good idea.
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe I'll turn it over to Nina, because we don't seem to have any other questions like me. So I'll turn over to Nina.
Okay, so I guess like everybody else did, I'll talk a little bit about my background and what led me to pursue law as a career and how I ended up where I am today. And I suppose the first thing that really piqued my interest in law was taking a law course in high school. And of course, I think that mainly focused on criminal law, which is such a small part of the legal system and the practice of law, but it was enough to sort of get me interested and have this idea in the back of my mind as I continued on to university. And in university, I started off by taking courses just in a bunch of different subjects to see what I would like and see what would stick, and to see what I found interesting while I figured out what sort of career path I wanted to pursue. And I ended up majoring in philosophy, which was a lot of research and essay writing and critical thinking. And then I also minored in sociology. So that gave me a little bit more exposure to criminology and the criminal law system again. And by the end of my undergraduate degree, I was sort of considering going into education, which is quite different from law, but I ended up working at a summer camp with 30 kids under me for a couple of months. And I thought, okay, this is not for me. So what else can we do? And I guess at the time it seemed like law school was the natural choice. So I wrote the LSAT and I started law school in 2016. So I think first year of law school is where you start to really become introduced to all of the different areas of the law. And I realized pretty quickly that I didn't think criminal law was for me, even though that was sort of what my exposure had been up to that point. Excuse me. I volunteered with the Manitoba Interfaith Immigration Council for a while. So I was assisting refugees with their asylum claims and doing various other immigration related work. And I really, really enjoyed that. I ended up getting a summer law student position with them as well through legal aid. And that was a really, a really great experience. And I learned a lot. In my last year or so of law school, I really pictured myself doing immigration or refugee law. And at the time, I think I was also interested in civil litigation and what options were available there. And I think if you had asked me at the time, the last thing that I wanted to do was family law, because I heard from a lot of people, a lot of lawyers practicing in that area, that it was just very emotionally taxing. And at the time, I didn't think that that was for me. So I was applying for different articling positions, and I was sort of in a similar situation to Brendan, where I didn't get a job during that initial hiring period. So I was really exploring other options. And one thing that was mentioned to me was sort of looking for a job outside of Winnipeg and exploring some of the opportunities in rural and remote places in Manitoba. So that was what I did. And I ended up actually accepting a position with Legal Aid in Dauphin. And I ended up doing primarily family law. And it seemed like a good fit for me at the time. And I'm glad that I kept an open mind when it came to sort of what area of the law I wanted to practice. I had a really good impression from my job interview there, and I honestly just really ended up enjoying my articling experience. A lot of people, Brendan and Victoria included, sort of described their articling experience as very intense and stressful. And honestly, I had the opposite experience of that. And the type of work that I was doing was, primarily working with clients who were going through separation or divorce, and they were trying to figure out things like child custody, child support, spousal support, and so on. So I was meeting with clients and going to court, drafting documents, and I even had the opportunity to take part in a family trial at the end of my articling year. So that was a really great experience because family trials are pretty uncommon as it is. So it was nice to kind of get to be a part of that. And I realized pretty quickly that the things that initially seemed like downsides about family law were actually things that were strengths of mine. So sort of, helping people deal with these really difficult situations and very emotional situations. I felt like that was a strength of mine, and sort of being able to bring people down a little bit and just deal with things in the best way that we could. And I actually ended up enjoying that part of the job a lot. I was also doing a little bit of criminal law and child protection, and that helped me get a lot more experience speaking in court and just being exposed to other areas of the law. But again, most of my job was in family law. And I think a lot of it sort of came down to the great people that I worked with and the environment that they created, because family law, I think, is very emotional and it's very difficult and it can be really stressful. But having a lot of good support and really great mentorship, I think, was what really allowed me to sort of thrive in that environment and really get the most out of it. Another thing that I'll say about practicing in Dauphin was that it was just this really small, tight-knit legal community where everyone knew each other quite well. And as an articling student, there was a lot that was new to me and I had a lot of questions. So it was really nice to sort of be in this environment where everybody knew me, they knew who I was, they knew I was an articling student, and I could turn to basically anyone in the legal community and they would be happy to answer my questions and help in whatever way that they could. And, the judges as well, they knew that I was an articling student. So sometimes if I was in court and there was maybe something that I wasn't sure about or, wasn't familiar with some of the procedure, the judges were also really kind and understanding with me. So that was definitely a big benefit. After articling, there ended up not being a position available at Legal Aid in Dauphin, but if there was, I certainly would have been happy to stay on for another couple of years. But I ended up actually getting a job with a small private firm in Winnipeg. And this was kind of at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. And I don't have, a ton of experience to compare that to, but COVID, I think, certainly impacted private practice quite a bit. I was continuing to work mainly in family law at the time, but I was also expanding my practice a little bit. But at the end of the day, it was very, very different from working for a place like Legal Aid. Most of my files were either coming from the partners at the firm, sort of sharing their work with me, or outside referrals. There was also a lot more, I think, interaction with paying clients, and I had to just sort of be more on top of that and give more updates because they wanted to know what was going on with their file, and they were spending lots of money on it, so they wanted to kind of keep on top of things in that way. One thing that I found a little bit difficult was sort of trying to strike this balance with how much time to spend on a client's file, because at the end of the day, you want to just work hard on a file and put as much work into it as it needs until it feels complete. But sometimes that's just not possible if somebody's sort of financial situation limits that and they don't have infinite money to spend on a lawyer. You have to be mindful of that and sort of, do your best with what you're given. A huge benefit, on the other hand, was just being able to have a lot of flexibility in terms of making my own hours and my own schedule. My firm was really supportive in terms of giving me a lot of freedom in how I wanted to manage my time, which was really great. But I think at the end of the day, I just realized that private practice wasn't the right thing for me at the time, based on my long-term goals. And Victoria sort of talked about wanting to have a good work-life balance and how that was important to her, and not really knowing if that was a realistic goal for someone in the legal profession. And I think that was definitely a big consideration for me as well. So as I started to look at other options that would align more closely with my passions and my interests, working for a not-for-profit, doing community-based work was something that was really appealing to me. So I ended up sort of applying for a job with the Community Legal Education Association, which is where I'm currently working. I had very, very briefly volunteered with them during my law school days. So I knew a little bit about CLEA as a not-for-profit and what they did. And now what I do is mainly developing workshops and programs, and then delivering these workshops across the province. So a big upside of my job is just getting to meet people in the community and feel like I'm giving them good information to be able to make informed choices in their lives. I feel like people are really learning something that can help them better navigate the complicated legal system, and just have that sort of background knowledge in case they ever do encounter anything in their lives, just to sort of understand how the legal system works, and just the basics of that, I think, is really beneficial. And the other part of my job that I really love is the creative part, and just being able to try out different ideas and what can we really do to reach more people and to achieve our goals. So that's something that I've enjoyed as well. It's not as rigid, and you're not expected to sort of adhere to somebody else's expectations, but it's really about what can we all do to grow the program and to make sure that it's more effective. I guess one thing that I would say to anybody who's considering law as a career, I would encourage you to reach out to different people who are working in the field. One thing that I wish I sort of had throughout my law school experience was just a better knowledge and understanding of what the legal profession is like. Like Brendan and Victoria said, just knowing what options are out there, and what the job really does look like on a day-to-day basis. Because I think we sort of have these misconceptions. Again, Victoria said maybe she thought she'd be sitting in an office all day. Some people think that practicing law is just going to be doing trials and being in court all day. But there's a lot that sort of goes into that day-to-day that I think a lot of people aren't aware of, and that's really what makes your job, or those tasks that you're doing on a daily basis. So there are lots of different options, and there's a lot that you just don't get to see or experience until you're thrown into it and you're doing it, or until you get to talk to somebody else who is doing it. So yeah, I guess one thing I would say is reach out to people if you really have an interest. Like send an email to somebody that practices in that area of the law. And generally, people here are very, very open to speaking about their experiences, giving advice and that kind of thing. So I think that would be really, really helpful to anybody who's considering it. And I guess that's all I have to say. So thank you for having me. I don't know if anybody has any questions.
You beat me to the question about what one thing would you like to know. So I've got others, though. I've thought of others while I was.
Oh, good.
So to all of you, actually, is there any particular course or courses that you need to take, or that would be good to take if you're thinking of going into law school? Haha, stumped you.
I guess I can answer that one. I personally, I can't say that I would recommend philosophy as an undergraduate major. If you're not really sure what you want to do, because I think it does limit your options a little bit, but I do think that those courses were really, really helpful to me throughout, my law school time, because it really forces you to look at anything critically, to be able to see sort of both sides of it, and to be able to form a concrete and logical argument. And I think that's not only a good skill for law school and for law practice, but also just a good life skill. So if anybody can take, a philosophy course or two, I think that's really good.
Brendan or Victoria, any other suggestions?
Sure, I can go. I took a wide variety of courses in my time before law school, kind of sampled everything. So I feel like they all contributed to my understanding of the law in ways that I maybe couldn't anticipate at the time, but ended up coming in handy. And I think that almost anything you take can be relevant. Even with my business courses that I thought I was never going to use again once I left, when I went to civil litigation and I was working on these really specific or obscure kind of corporate law principles or cases like that, it was helpful to kind of have some of that background knowledge about how, the businesses were structured and things like that, and how the, financial documents were going to work, just to have kind of that base knowledge, because I was transferring to such a different area of law. But even things like, psychology, I took family social sciences courses, and understanding, human dynamics and things like that too, and social dynamics ended up being helpful in criminal law and every area of practice, really. I also know people who've gone in with like fine arts backgrounds or science backgrounds, things that don't appear to be relevant at first. And then they end up finding a really cool niche, doing like art law or doing, a really specific area of environmental law or things like that too. And I think that you can really take any background and make it relevant. But yeah, everything I took ended up being useful in some way or another.
Yeah, and I'll kind of echo what Nina said at philosophy. I took a philosophy course in my undergrad that was specifically about logical reasoning, which I think was extremely helpful. It's probably not a super commonly offered course all the time, but if you can take something like that, it's a great idea. I think English or any kind of writing course helps a lot, because law school and being a lawyer involves a lot of writing a lot of the time. And I'll also say one that I didn't take that I kind of wish I had more of a background in is like politics or even history. I know my first class of law school was constitutional law, and I kind of sat there in the first 10 minutes and was like, Constitution, huh? What's that about? Like I just didn't have the background, and I was like, oh, this is going to be a rough ride here. So understanding kind of how the government works, I think, is a great step up going into law school.
Great answers. Those are perfect. Thank you. And just on the spot too. Okay, I've got a couple more since no one else is asking questions. Victoria mentioned the LSAT. What do people do to prepare for the LSAT? Like, what can you do?
There's practice tests you can find out there. You can buy books of them, or you can probably find some online that are just tests from past years. That's kind of all I did, was just kind of take it, or at least sections of it, over and over again. I think in the month leading up to it, I did like 1 to 2 LSATs a day. So, which is it's intense. If you do the whole thing, it's like a 3-hour test, or 4 hours maybe even. So it's a lot, but I think just practicing it, just so you kind of get the hang of it.
Okay. Anybody else?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. You can go, Nina.
Oh, thank you. I was going to say, I think that Brendan's right. It's really something that you just have to take practice tests over and over again to get better at it. Like the LSAT is really a test that I think you can prepare for. And the more that you do it, the more that you improve your score and sort of get better at identifying certain patterns in the questions. So I think just doing those practice tests as much as possible, and then going back over your answers, and especially seeing where you went wrong is really helpful, and sort of doing it in a timed environment as well, because a big part of writing the LSAT is just that environment that you're in. There's a lot of pressure. You're sort of forced to move quick, and if you haven't finished your section, you have to move on. So just getting yourself sort of used to that, and writing a test like that under pressure, I think is the best that you can do.
Sure. Victoria?
Yeah, I remember at the time when I was studying for the LSAT, after getting my books or in them at 2 a.m, I was working full time and I was in school full time. So I was trying to find time to study for this LSAT that I'd committed myself to in the midst of all that. So I had to be really intentional with my studying, and I couldn't afford a practice course. I remember that distinctly because they are quite expensive. Sometimes they're upwards of $1,000 for a week. So my advice, I guess, is that there are a lot of materials from different brands, some that are from the LSAC, like the organization that oversees the LSAT, and some are from private companies. And each one kind of has its own way of explaining the strategy and different tips for strategies. So I found a brand that really explained it in a way that made sense to me, and that really helped me. Whereas I had read other people's books, and the way that those authors or brands described it didn't resonate with me quite as much. So I think finding a resource that really helps you to connect with the strategy that you're going to take for the LSAT, that was helpful for me in terms of dedicating my time to it. And then it also allowed me to, like Nina said, it's mostly a strategy issue of becoming experienced with the test and what that format and those questions are going to look like, how to answer them quickly, and then how you're going to approach the questions, because there are too many questions to answer generally within the time allotted. And so it becomes like a strategy of picking how you're going to answer and when. And that, I think, was something that I took on for any multiple choice test that I ever had again. It was super helpful. But learning that strategy was so important. So I think that having resources that align with your learning style is really important too. And yeah, just becoming as familiar as you can with the LSAT test, because it is kind of like nothing else. And it also is like nothing you'll really encounter in law school. It's a very specific exercise. So
thank you for those. Those are great answers. So Brendan had mentioned how difficult it is sometimes to get a job after articling. How hard is it to get into law school in the first place?
That's a good question. I don't know, quite frankly. I was lucky enough to get in like very early. I had the early admission because my LSAT score was like surprisingly good, and my university grades were also pretty good at that point in time. So I really don't know. I know there's a wait list that you can get put on, so that even if you don't necessarily get accepted right away, there is hope for you. A friend of mine, and Victoria's actually, she says she thinks she was the very last person on the wait list because she only found out she got into law school like a week before the first day of classes. So it can happen, I guess. Yeah.
Okay, and they do look at basically your marks from a university, et cetera, and then they look at the LSAT score. That's primarily what they do. I think my understanding was in other law schools, they also do interviews. Is that the case? Or?
I think they do. Sorry, Victoria, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I believe so. Yeah, every law school kind of has different factors that they look at.
I think at least here too, there are other categories you can get in on. There's like a personal consideration category where if maybe your grades aren't that great or you didn't do that well on the LSAT, you can still get in if you can sort of prove yourself that you're maybe passionate about it, or if you have extreme circumstances you've lived through or something like that.
And do they still do the mature student? Is that also half-time?
Yeah, I think they do, yeah.
Just things I remember. Sorry, go ahead.
I think in terms of being able to get into law school, it really depends on where you're applying and what their criteria are. As was mentioned at the U of M, for just the regular admission category, all they look at is the LSAT score and your GPA during university. And there's also sort of a maximum for how many credit hours they look at, I think. So if you have over a certain amount of credits, then they sort of drop your lowest one. So that helps you out a little bit. But I know that other schools, they do interviews. Maybe the grades in the LSAT score that you need to get into those schools is a little bit higher. And as far as the wait list goes, it really varies from year to year. Like I think in my year, the wait list went like 70 people deep or something like that. So it really depends on, your particular group. Are they applying to other schools? Are they going elsewhere, and they're, not taking their spot at U of M. So I think the best thing that you can do is just focus on your own grades, your own LSAT score, and hopefully increase your chances at whatever school you're hoping to get into.
And I guess do your research in terms of the different schools and what their criteria are.
And I know as far as the LSAT goes too, there's an essay component of it, and the U of M, it doesn't count towards your LSAT score, and the U of M doesn't look at it, but there are other schools that also do look at that written component of the LSAT, which is interesting.
Okay, any other questions from anybody or any other comments, final comments, because we're getting on to 1 o'clock. No. We thank you very much to the presenters, to Nina and Victoria and Brandon. Excellent job. And nothing hinges on this in terms of your job performance at work, let me tell you. Thank you all for joining us. And we hope you enjoy the rest of your day and have a safe and great weekend and that the snow stops. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.